I think just that what they're doing is incredibly important. The sacrifice and the time away from family is asked for by the government of Canada. And when everyone talks about what is sacrifice, it looks differently. And this particular book happens to be about Afghanistan, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories of Canadians that have served overseas to do things like the present mission in Latvia, or the large deployments to Germany during the Cold War, or the plethora of UN peacekeeping missions around the world to bring peace to nations that are affected by war. And so I think that would be sometimes it's hard to see the purpose. And I think that if someone's listening, it's a point that the purpose is there and what you're doing is recognized and it is important, even if sometimes it doesn't feel that way.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. Today, I've been talking to somebody in Peru, the U.S., Canada, and now I'm at the other side of the world talking to my guest today. It's amazing what you can do with a podcast and the amazing people you get to talk to. And not only is this person on the other side of the world from me, he's also in the future, which is amazing for me. And he's also has roots here in Canada, which is really special as well. Proudly served his country and done so with many great stories to share. Definitely has probably changed him and given him some insight into life. And Steve is here to share about his book, his journey as an author, and to share his thoughts with us on the podcast. Steve, so glad to have you on the podcast. Welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Dave, thanks for having me on all the way from New Zealand. So it's good morning from New Zealand.
There you go. Beautiful. Excellent. Where are you originally from, though, here in Canada?
So I was born in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and then moved around quite a bit, but really settled, did my high school years in Ontario, and then joined the forces around 19 years old, moved back out west, posted in Manitoba, and then, like the forces do, I was posted all over Canada. So I lived in the west, in the east, and the center of Canada throughout my life, my 25 years in the forces. So I'd say I've got a great insight into each part of the country and all those great things that make it Canadian.
Wow. And we just recently celebrated our Remembrance Day, Veterans Day for our friends in the U.S. So again, thank you for your service. And I'm glad that we still have this day to honor the men and women that serve our country. So thank you for all that you've done. What was the initial spark for you to go, hey, I want to do this with the rest of my life? Like, what was it for you to draw you to the service?
It was actually a very specific event. I had started going to Queen's University, and I was sitting in an international politics class, and in the class, the professor had invited a Canadian officer in to talk about the situation in Yugoslavia. This was kind of 1992, 93. And at the time, to be honest, I didn't really know much about the Canadian military or that we were active around the world. And this gentleman came in and told us these incredible stories of Canadians working peacekeeping missions in Africa, in Yugoslavia, in places like Cambodia, and places in the world that really needed help. And so I thought that's something that I'd like to do. And so I went down to the recruiting center, and they offered initially, you're in university, so a couple more years, and then you can come back as an officer. And I said, no, I'd like to join right now and go off to maybe try to do some of these types of missions and see what it's like at the ground level. And so they said, well, you can join as a private soldier. And so I signed up, and about 7 months later, I got in and started my career as a soldier in the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. So there's a direct line between, exposure to Canadian Forces members coming in to talk and my kind of decision to move forward with that as a career.
So now let's put the shoe on the other foot. You're now have the ability to walk into that university classroom knowing all the things you've done and the things you've seen and experienced. What would be your message to a classroom of students who are unaware of how they can serve their country in the way you have?
I think that each individual can make a difference. And however you choose to serve, whether that be within uniform, within the military, or whether that be to serve your community, or whether that to try to work with a non-governmental organization and work internationally, there's an opportunity to serve and the world needs it. And I think that's probably the overarching message right now, is that the world can use young people with energy to try to solve the problems that we are faced with today. And whatever mechanism you use to do it, that's how you should try to look to approach a part of your life. Maybe it won't be the whole part of your life, but maybe a small portion of it, because it'll allow you to learn things that you'll learn outside of the classroom, or that's something that you'll learn outside of the kind of the normal parameters of following a career. You'll be exposed to different people and different ideas. And I think it's important that we all get different contexts as we move forward.
When was it very real to you that you are in a different place through your service? Like, when was it for you that you just kind of all kicked in and you're like, I'm actually doing this. I'm actually doing the thing right now.
I think the military does a great job of letting you know you stepped across the line.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think that there is a set pattern that's historical that everyone could recognize from movies or whatever that allows you to know that, you know, Toto, you're not in Kansas anymore. And so whether that be haircuts or wearing a uniform or understanding what your role is now, and the level of responsibility and accountability that is put upon a young person, I think, is actually quite high, which is different, you know, and that's something that once we get into the book that you'll see, like a lot of the stories are from 18, 19 and 20-year-olds that decided to join and serve the nation. And then the realization that they're doing something that's quite different than what the average 18, 19 or 20-year-old is doing in Canada. And the decisions that they have to make, they're going to be held to account and held accountable for. And I think that's a big difference. And so for me, I think on day one of entering into our basic training, that's where you really realize it. And then there's another shift as you start to go operational. And the next big realization for me is that once I became a leader, you're not just accountable anymore for yourself and your own actions, but you're accountable and responsible to other Canadian youth that can either be put into harm's way or will have to make their own decisions. And you're responsible to help guide and lead them in those times of stress. And I think that's a no greater, but an important responsibility and distinction between being a good follower and being a good leader. And those things are both offered to you in your time in the military.
When you signed up and started your training, what did you come face to face with where you learned, oh, I need to develop this part of me better? I didn't realize that this is something that I hadn't worked on, but now I'm face to face with it. Was it like discipline?
Yeah.
All of it? What was the thing for you that stood out? I got to work on this part of me.
The biggest thing I remember is learning to do the small things well. So I arrived in my battalion as a young soldier, and like all young soldiers, they want to take like the really advanced courses. They want to learn how to do the fancy things that you see on the movies. And the first course that I took was learning how to drive an armored vehicle, like a tracked armored vehicle. And I wasn't so happy about it. It's not something that I really had any desire to do. And I had this old corporal that we had to move a vehicle one day, and I was kind of probably being young. And he he laughed. He kind of pulled me aside. He said, "Listen, like I think you're a good guy, but I'm going to tell you something. Like the military works in a certain way. They're going to trust you to do simple things, and if you do those well, they're going to trust you to do more complex things. And you have to build yourself up so that we trust you to continue to do those things that you see as important. But at the first instance, you got to do those things that we see are important. And so you learn about the collective, and you learn about doing small things well to build up your repository of knowledge so that you can do more complex things well. And so I thought that was really important for me because I think like all young people, you want to be right at the top right away. And you've got to find a path, and you've got to learn how to mark that path to success, whatever success is for you.
That's a great lesson for life.
I think so. I really count that corporal. His name was Bill Murray, with a lot of he was very humble, and he'd been around a long time, and he really kind of took me under his wing and showed me the way as a young soldier.
Wow. Okay, so now you are a new author. You have a book out going on in the world. What is it like for you to put on this new uniform as an author? What kind of things are you learning about yourself in the process of writing the book?
Well, the process was interesting for me in that it was a collection of interviews, 150 interviews over a couple of years with people that I had either served with or we had served in similar areas. And so it was a very comfortable path, and uncomfortable in terms of some of the pieces that we had talked about. But being an author or being someone who's released a book was nerve-wracking, to be honest. It was all very good when it was protected and hidden. The minute that I had to go, like I was actually told, no, this is going to go out tomorrow, I was panicked. Like, oh, I really hope I did justice to the stories. I hope that I represented the equities of these people well. I hope that, the only things I want to accomplish with this is that there's an honest translation of these stories to represent the people that served. And all of a sudden, I was struck by, oh, do I really want this to go out? And it was good to go through that feeling, and then to come through the other side and to see the people will have critiques and they will have support, but for the most part, it was good. Almost like you have to be uncomfortable to get comfortable, and I think that was it's like another lesson in a different type of challenge. So it was good for me.
Have you done a lot of writing in the past?
Not to this extent. I've written obviously. As a military officer, you have to write professionally in terms of normal work papers and for processes and orders and those type of things. And then I've written a couple of articles, surrounding mostly professional articles that have gone out. And then I'm doing my PhD right now, and so I have to write academically. But it's a very different type of writing than something that you're tied to maybe a little bit more emotionally, and that you feel a responsibility to. So it's one thing to have an opinion and then state a logical opinion that can be argued for or against, inside of an academic paradigm. It's another thing to really kind of connect or want to connect with a subject matter and emotionally put it out there, because you're kind of putting a piece of yourself out there. And I have a number of my stories are hidden inside the book, and that's why it's important. And so I think that's another piece of it.
Nice. So take us behind the name of the book. Can you explain the name to me so I understand, in my non-military background, what this book is, how this book got titled?
Absolutely. So No Names, No Pack Drill is the saying that evolved from the British military, but has been adopted primarily by Commonwealth militaries all over the world. And what it means, pack drill, in the first instance, is a punishment. So when a soldier had done something wrong and there was a punishment, they'd be given a very heavy pack, and then there'd be a very small square that would be laid out on the ground, and an NCO would remind them of what they had to do properly they would march, like parade square march, with this heavy pack in what's called double quick time, so very fast. So it's a physical punishment. And so that's the first thing you have to know about the pack drill part. No Names, No Pack Drill is something that primarily NCOs or leaders would use to say to a leader that was higher than them, I'm going to tell you that there's a lesson that you're going to want to hear of something that's happened. I've dealt with it at my level. And so I'm going to give you this disclaimer. No names, and therefore no pack drill. No punishment should come from the stories that I'm about to tell you. Because what's most important from this is the lessons that can be gleaned from the story I'm going to tell you. Not that you need to find someone accountable, because I've already dealt with it. And so it would be like if you or I were talking, and I would say, Dave, I've got something to tell you. I think it's important. But before I do, no names, no pack drill. And that would allow us then to understand the frame that we're talking in. Okay. And so for my book, that's important, because these are a deep collection of stories, and the Canadian soldier is quite humble and doesn't necessarily want to be connected to the stories. And in essence, for the book, because there's no one named, they're everyone's stories. And so any Canadian that picks it up could connect with any veteran that they know, or any idea that they know, and any veteran that picks it up, it should represent a general experience of the time in our time in Afghanistan.
So do you have a vision of who is a good reader for this book? Like, this would be the ultimate book to give to this person, or as a servicemen and women, is this something that they would want to read?
I believe so. As I understand it, there's a number of, or the initial response has been that it's been a very good book for people that have served. But I think that actually there's a much broader audience. Okay. When I looked at, or I thought about an audience, I thought, of course, people that wanted to reflect and to share with their families some of their experience. And that's what I've been told, is that a lot of times veterans now they've used a little like excerpts from it as a tool to connect with their families or to their friends about, hey, this is maybe something I haven't been comfortable to talk about, but here, read this, and then maybe we can talk. So that's one segment of the population. I think as importantly, or maybe more importantly, are people that are interested in Canada and Canadians and our time and our commitment to Afghanistan. because I think that the average Canadian saw what happened on CTV News.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of narrative. There's been a lot of narrative about those experiences. And then there's been a number of books that have either been like senior commanders talking about Afghanistan, so geopolitical type discussions.
Yeah.
And then there's been individual discussions about a one person's experience in Afghanistan. And what I had hoped that this would fit in between those, almost like a brick and mortar, as the mortar, because this is a very broad population. So a lot of people's perspectives that are very specific and tactile, like tangible, so that people can really get a feel from multiple viewpoints and a diverse perspective of what life was like for the average Canadian. And I think that, given the time of year, this is exactly the type of time that Canadians or people that are in schools maybe want to read something that's quick and can connect with it. And that's the other part of the design of the book is each story. Some stories are a paragraph, some are 2 pages, no more than 2 pages. And so it's very accessible, and you could pick it up and read 1 page and get something out of it. And so I actually kind of hope that regardless of your military background, there is a general interest in Canadian history and in Canadians doing things and what it was like for them. And that's really who this is for, is also to maybe help gain some specific context or perspective on that time for young people in Afghanistan.
I'm curious about the cover of the book as well. That image that we're seeing with the arrows pointing in different directions. Yeah. Can you explain what's going on here?
Yeah, so I was involved in an major operation in 2006 known as Operation Medusa. And what had happened was there was a group of, in short terms, a group of Taliban, 600 to 800 Taliban dug into a certain area. And then there was a multi-day, about a 2-week battle that we fought with this group of Taliban. One of the ways to gain access to the where they were dug in was to use bulldozers across grape fields to gain access as they looked to defend the area and to counterattack. That then created roads that needed to be navigated because the Taliban would come at night and then put in IEDs. So a series of signs were put up. The picture that you see on the front cover was a little bit later in the after the fight had completed, but those signs were still required for these trails that we had to go on. And this was obviously a couple of soldiers that had kind of taken the mickey on this and had hammered in a steel stake and pointed that south of this area was actually quite bad and said, so this way to the suck.
Yeah.
And then of course in Canadian humor, no, other way stupid. And so a company second command, a guy named Max Michael Shields, had snapped the picture as he was rolling by, moving into the next phase of the battle space. And I think that picture has sit in people's inboxes over the last 20 years. And I always thought it was such a great example of during, maybe hard times, how Canadian soldiers interact and how they have humor even in the face of adversity. And so when people look at the cover, it's going to cause some confusion as to what is this? But it's really kind of designed to the first step of communication of, hey, welcome to a book that's about the realities of how Canadian soldiers interact.
What is the relationships between all the different countries represented serving in that area at that time? Is it? I'm in my mind not understanding all the things that happen in military life. Are the Canadians with the Canadians and the Americans are with the Americans, and people are kind of separate, or is everybody blended? What is it like to kind of serve?
Yeah, so that's a one, either a very simple question or a very technical question. So command and control in the military is like a mystery even to people in the military. Okay. But in this instance, in Afghanistan, there was 2 overt missions that were established. One was the American Operation Enduring Freedom, which was the first step in an invasion of Afghanistan. And then that was a counterterrorism mission, specifically to destroy Taliban and Al-Qaeda leadership, and then set the conditions post 9/11. Yeah. The other mission was as an international stabilization assistance force mission. So Afghanistan is the only time that Article 5 from NATO has been declared, and all of most of NATO's countries actively participated in this mission. This was a stability mission initially in Kabul, which then transitioned down to Kandahar. The nations do operate together, but they have areas called areas of operations that they're responsible for. And so in this instance, the Canadians are responsible for the Kandahar region. But that said, The British were aligned next in Helmand. There was American aircraft, Dutch aircraft. The Danes worked in Helmand and actually during multiple operations came across to assist. And so the higher commander would decide what assets or resources you required. And then the nations would participate if they received orders to add those on. So if you needed more, you would receive more from different countries. And if you needed to go and help somebody else, then you would depart. And so there are lots of instances where Canadians went to Helmand to assist the Brits, particularly in 2006, 2007. There was a number of instances where there were other forces, particularly in the later stages, as more Americans flowed into the area of operations in 2009. Americans almost became intermixed with under Canadian command, Canadian Brigade Command. And so it's very interesting. And it's something that shows kind of the depth of relationship we have with these nations to take on those kind of responsibilities together.
And what was the timing like for you to come home and that mission ended for you? Kind of talk about the leaving of someplace you've been for so long.
Yeah. So, I mean, I served 3 full rotations in Afghanistan. So it's kind of around 23 months of my life there. And I think that during that period of time between 2004 and 2014, people in the Canadian Army were either training for going to or recovering from Afghanistan and training other people to go to Afghanistan because we had a massive commitment. Our army itself isn't that large in comparison to other nations' armies, and so we only have 3 brigades. And so if you think about one 2,500 person organization getting ready to go, another one just getting home, and another one in the theater, and across that, then you've kind of got 7,500 people deployed at any one time. And then all the additional resources you require. So it was a massive commitment for Canada. So for me, I think that was a big focal point. And I think for everybody during that time was a focal point for our life. And when Canada withdrew in 2014, I think for all the reasons that was required, it left a space that needed to be filled for us. And it was like the world is no safer. And we immediately redeployed to Iraq to start the counter ISIL fight. There was the Ukrainian incursion in 2014, and then the commitment to Latvia, which goes on to this day. And so I think that the Canadian forces continue to be busy, just not in Afghanistan. And so now we're a decade down that track. And after departing Afghanistan, that's why I thought it was a good chance to capture some of this before it got lost, particularly the day-to-day feelings. Because my fear is that we would just carry on and maybe not reflect on that time just because everyone is so busy and the world does carry on and it is still quite challenging.
What I find interesting, I've actually heard feedback from listeners to the show that they are serving outside of their country and they're on different locations around the world. They do have access to some degree to things like podcasts and things from home, and that's something that's encouraging. So if, Steve, someone's listening to this and hearing, what your book's about and your service, and it's resonating with them because where they're stationed, do you have a message for them to encourage them at all?
I think just that what they're doing is incredibly important. The sacrifice and the time away from family is asked for by the government of Canada. And when everyone talks about what is sacrifice, it looks differently. And this particular book happens to be about Afghanistan, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories of Canadians that have served overseas to do things like the present mission in Latvia, or the large deployments to Germany during the Cold War, or the plethora of UN peacekeeping missions around the world to bring peace to nations that are affected by war. And so I think that would be sometimes it's hard to see the purpose. And I think that if someone's listening, it's a point that the purpose is there and what you're doing is recognized and is important, even if sometimes it doesn't feel that way.
So the collection of stories that you have, when were you really focused on, I have to collect these stories, I have to do something with these stories at some point? What was the original point in your mind that said, I don't want to lose track of these stories, and I want to keep track of this?
When I was departing the forces, it was amazing. I was privileged enough to finish off as a battalion commander. That's an organization of about 800 people. And when I looked at our population, the people that had served in Afghanistan now, instead of being throughout the battalion, were now really at the more senior levels of battalion. And I realized that within 5 years, that cycle had already occurred, that refreshing of the force had already occurred. And so these people were going to be gone. And so I started to form in my mind an idea that how could I capture these thoughts? And then as I started to read other literature about Afghanistan, again, it goes back to that point of it always seemed to aim high or aim to the individual. And I wanted to aim for the collective and to represent those equities. And so that's when it really started. And so I started kind of a routine of wherever I could, I would set up a time and space, an afternoon to do interviews. And once I was out, and I would meet people all over. So if I traveled for work or if I was traveling directly for the book, I would set aside half days at a time, and then set up sometimes 1 hour, sometimes 3 hour time slots, and people would come in and just talk. And I would had a series of questions, and I put out a kind of a letter and a disclaimer, and people were free to join me to have a coffee and to discuss their experiences. And then I just kind of continued that routine for about 2.5 years of collecting all these interviews, and then starting to transcribe and then pull the pieces out that I thought were most appropriate for the themes within the book.
All right. Is there?
So I would guess there's probably 500 to 800 hours of, probably 500 hours or more of interviewing.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Is there any way that you can share a little bit from your book with us? Make one of these little stories at all? And put you on the spot.
Sure. I hadn't really. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of which one would be. Is there a theme? I can pull it out. I hadn't really thought about it before, and some of the language is salty.
Yeah. There you go.
So I just want to make sure that I do something right. What kind of theme would you like to have? Here's one for an introduction, I guess.
Okay, sure.
And as you start to get to know, like if we call them the characters.
Okay.
Here's a character. I was a city kid from Toronto, and the military was a big change for me. From the first minute of my military career, Afghanistan was the focus. We were in an army at war. I remembered doing the first notifications of soldiers dying before I even really understood the army. Honestly, before I was a royal. I had just arrived in battalion. We were on physical training, and I checked my work phone at the end of the session. I had to pull the platoon together, and time stood still. I have bad news. I remember telling the guys that the first troops had been killed in Kabul. It was surreal, like something out of a movie. There were senior NCOs had known these guys for years. It was a shock to them. To me, they were just names. To the soldiers with experience, they were lifelong friends. They knew their families. The warhead had come home quickly. From my first minutes as an RCR leader, Afghanistan was the focus for the next decade. I learned that people matter, and when the enemy wins, the losses are not just numbers, and you had better have your together because the troops are counting on you. From the minute I started leading, it was real.
So you just have story after story after story like this that really kind of puts us in place in Afghanistan and gives us some insight into what's happening, right?
Yeah. So the path of the book is, for example, that story comes from, I thought about it through the lens of like warning and joining. So young people thinking about joining the army, or what were their first experiences in the army, or when did they get told they were going to Afghanistan? What did that feel like? And then you have a chapter on the pre-training, like the mental and physical preparation to go to Afghanistan. Then there's a chapter on the in-flight, which is an experience, and transitioning from Canada into Afghanistan. And then first experiences, and then first contact with the enemy, which is a big deal. It's when you really realize that someone is trying to hurt you and take you away from your family, and that you might have to defend yourself, and you might have to take human life. And then people talk about the grind, because if you understand the grind in Afghanistan, you understand what it was like, because every day was just a similar kind of routine that demanded attention, and every day there was a chance that something bad and that would happen. But you had to stay sharp. But it's hard because it's easy for humans to kind of lose focus. And then there are as a whole chapter dedicated to kind of bad days, which is a hard chapter. Was a hard chapter, is a hard chapter, and it talks about loss and what it's like to lose. And then there's a chapter about preparing to go home and to blowing off steam, and where soldiers find themselves doing some shenanigans that maybe they should or shouldn't do, but they're real stories. And then lastly, about coming home, and then reflections after the mission. And so if you think about the pattern of the book, it's like you're going on a tour of duty.
Okay.
And so you're taken with the stories that are themed right through that tour of duty in Afghanistan.
When all we have for some of us as a point of reference, Hollywood and television and all of that, that's the only thing we can see as far as a kind of a snapshot into what it's like. What are we not getting the truth about? Like, what is Hollywood kind of glossing over or missing that was kind of a shock for you to be there on the ground next to these people and serving in this way? What does Hollywood get wrong?
Yeah, so I don't know that Hollywood gets anything wrong. In fact, if anything, they've probably become far more accurate. Good. As there's been a demand for, like I think when Oliver Stone started to kind of change the dynamic of like quote unquote war movies, and there was that trend of Vietnam War movies in the 80s that shifted the kind of paradigm a bit there. Okay. And so I don't want to critique Hollywood. What I would say is that this offering provides you like a tangible, tactile feel for the individual voices on the ground, and that the nation asks people to do very serious things, right? And that those serious things come with consequences, and that these people are human, and so they have faults and they make mistakes, and they recover from those mistakes and they learn from them and they go again, and that they hold on to those things that they do for a while because they're quite dramatic. And so there's a feeling of that I think that there's consequence to actions that maybe aren't reflected in the everyday life of someone who hasn't experienced it. And so this is just a vehicle by which maybe they can be connected to that.
All right. I'm glad that qualifies that, because again, we always kind of wonder, you see TV and stuff and you're thinking, well, is it been sanitized? Has it been made so it's not as real as it really is? Right.
Yes. Yeah. So I think here that the soldiers are very humble, and they often talk about, like in the chapter about first contacts, most of them talk about how they messed up, like because it's a shock. Like you're there, and all of a sudden someone's shooting at you, and you don't even realize it, and yet your whole training has been designed to respond to enemy contact. And then all of a sudden you're kind of frozen, and then you have a decision to make, right? Because responding to contact is doing something unnatural in unnatural circumstances. Every fiber of your being is designed so that you will like protect yourself and live. And yet your job in this instance is to move forward into the fire, not to withdraw from it, and to be able to respond to that effectively. And your responsibility is to your friends, not to yourself. And so this is immediately like a cognitive dissonance of what's going on. And so the soldiers that have relayed those feelings, I think that's one of the things that they really do a really good job of in their humble way is explain that kind of first instance. And then that combat is a learned skill like everything else. And as you become more conditioned to it, you respond better. And, they talk about in the NFL, the game slowing down for veterans. I think that's a similar instance. The game slows down, and so you can be more practiced in your approach to this. And I think that's an important kind of qualifier inside of the book.
And then through your training, your first few months or whatever of training, you're in a room full of strangers, people you've never met before from all over Canada. They're ready to serve. You hardly know each other as a group, but now you're in a spot in the world where you have to rely on each other. So it's got to cement that relationship.
Absolutely, and that's something else that the book kind of touches on is we talk. I believe that there's a lot of discussion about culture and military culture and what that is, and I think that's a big part of not directly, but indirectly, what the individuals kind of talk about is what helped them get through this, what helped them be successful, and how did that cementing of the collective do that. And so, what did it mean to take in? There's a introduction in one of the stories of the soldiers needing to. They believe that the things that sucked the most during training is what brought them the closest together, and then allowed them to be successful and resilient once they were in combat. And I think that's an important takeaway, maybe for anybody, that the things that are hard may be the things that allow you that resilience in the future. And so it's okay to maybe have to do some hard things.
I can't imagine what it feels like to be there, to be in Afghanistan for those first few days as you're trying to acclimatize yourself to what's going on. And like you said, now there's people who are trying to hurt you. Your mind must have to process all of this in such fast processes just to get this figured out for your safety. You got to be ready to go. And I guess it goes back to your training, but I just can't imagine how you've gone from training to reality so quickly.
Well, that's part of the transition, like the chapter on transition.
Okay.
That is essentially what people are coming to terms with. Yeah. And don't forget that the environment itself is alien. You're moving from, let's say you left Canada in February, it was wintertime. Yeah. You're going to show up in Afghanistan and it's hot and it's dusty and the smells are different and the people are different. And depending on your job, you're going to end up working quite closely or living with Afghans who have a different way of living, and you're going to partner with them and you're going to go live. So there's a full sections in the book about Afghans and Afghan partners. And there were a number of Canadians. I also held this type of job where you'd be in a very small team and you would go live with a larger group of Afghans to provide advice and mentorship. And then you would move out to gain contact with the enemy with your Afghan partners. So if you think you've got 4 Canadians, then no one else in your group speaks really good English, and you're trying to do everything through hand signals and getting things done. That in itself is a completely different challenge than maybe you would have been used to when you're trained in Canada and everyone has the same equipment, the same way of doing things. And so you've got to adapt, not just for what you've talked about of now you're in a new place with this team. That team becomes very comfortable. Those things that are familiar become very comfortable because there are so many new inputs that you've got to take on at once, that you've got to kind of process that and then figure out your place in it, and then how to best survive and really get your job done because the mission has primacy.
Does the fact that you have this book out in the world, does this open the door for you, Steve, to keep writing?
I think so. I mean, my next step really is to try to focus to complete the academic work. Yeah. But I am interested. There's a couple of projects that I'm interested in, and along a similar theme, but a different type of book. So this book I think is unique. Yeah. In that it's a one of. I was heavily influenced by a book by Barry Broadfoot, a Canadian author, called 6 Warriors, and he had done a similar type of work. There's another book by a guy named Mark Baker called NAM, and he had done a similar type of work where it's a collection of stories where the stories are the centerpiece and there's just small introductions, which is what I've done throughout this. And so I think that those are areas that well, I don't think I'll repeat the style or the method again, but I do believe that there are stories that need to be told from this mission and from other missions that maybe deserve some attention.
As you pull these stories together in the process of writing the book, what kind of common threads are you seeing from story to story as you pull this all together for us?
So I'm seeing a common theme of soldiers that have incredible pride in their nation and in each other. And I think that's very apparent throughout, because they're motivated, obviously not by money, nor by any thoughts of recognition, because their names aren't mentioned in here, but by wanting to try to get it right and get the job done well. And so I think that's a very important theme and maybe a different type of motivation than we see. Not better, any worse than other people out there, just different. I think that resilience is a key theme, and there's a lot of kind of narrative around the broken veteran. But I think that that narrative is offset in some manner to the stories of resilience and the numbers of people that have gone through and that have sought, if they needed help, have sought help and have been successful and have continued to live their life well. And then I think there are lessons, and you know, the Honorable Peter MacKay was very good to write the foreword to this. You know, former Minister of Defense, and he is far more pointed. I made a point of not having any kind of political commentary because I just wanted the soldier stories, but he is far more pointed in that he talks about how if we're going to do this again, we have to have a strategy that connects to what does success look like. And we have to give a full commitment if we're going to send our soldiers to war ever again. And I think that's a key theme that goes from the forward right to the reflections at the back end, that the soldiers are willing and able to conduct whatever mission Canada puts forward to them. And I think the social contract of that is that Canada would want to decide what does success look like, and then allow people to move forward to accomplish that.
So Peter MacKay's name is pretty common, pretty popular here in Canada. People know who that person is for sure. What is your connection with Peter? How did that happen?
So actually, he's just a great guy. So he wouldn't remember, but I had met him twice and I'd observed him. Once in Petawawa. Okay. He came and he actually played rugby with the soldiers when he was Minister of National Defense. And he actually got injured. I can't remember what got injured, a shoulder or an arm or something, but he was just a good sport. Like he was just like, he got out there and he dug in and he like got tackled and he got hurt. And he was just a good sport about it. And I thought, wow, it's really impressive for a senior leader to put themselves out there like that and to really pitch in with the troops. And then I came across him again in Afghanistan on one of my tours, and he was visiting. I didn't get a chance to talk to him, but I saw him respond to some soldiers that were quite elevated and you know, talking about certain things. And he was just a real gentleman and thoughtful and really worked hard. And during that time, that was his kind of consistent message. And then after Afghanistan was over and he left politics, he continued to work in veterans health as in a voluntary board capacity, I believe with Wounded Warriors Canada. And so his connection to that group stayed. And I was asked to go on a podcast called Northern Sentinels with a guy named Chris Ayotte. And he gave me an opportunity to kind of talk about some stuff. And then Peter MacKay was on like 2 episodes later. And so I had no direct connection with Mr. MacKay. And then I asked if there's an opportunity maybe to drop him a line. And he was just so open. Like he asked if he could read the manuscript, and then he was so supportive, and then put his name forward and penned the forward personally. And you know, just seems like a humble, really thoughtful gentleman who's trying to do the best for Canada that he can in this instance. You know, he's out of public life now, but yeah, I think he was quite thoughtful, and for somebody like me, I thought it was quite interesting and very just very nice. I guess would be my expression. He was just very nice, and so that was very very nice way for me to close it, because what I wanted to do, and the reason for this is somebody who wasn't in uniform but was really at the top and responsible for a lot of our decisions or had great influence over some of the mission. I wanted that connected to those of us that were in uniform on the ground. And I thought that was an interesting piece, because it's the only kind of higher perspective that exists. And it's not somebody in uniform. It's somebody that's outside of uniform and has a broader view of Canadian security and of what Canada was trying to do at the time.
And to take an idea, collect the stories, and then get a seal of approval like Peter adding his words to your book. That's like a full circle moment to have that stamp of approval. You're on the right journey with this book.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think so.
It's very rewarding. It's amazing. Steve, as far as people wanting to connect with you to talk more about the book, maybe they want you on their podcast, they want to reach out to you in some way, before I ask you my final question here as we wrap up, where are we sending people to connect with you? Like a reader, somebody that's interested in talking to you further, where do we send them?
So I'm on the only social media that I do is maybe that's a mistake is LinkedIn.
Okay.
And so I can be found there. I'm quite happy in the podcast notes to provide like a contact that way if that's of interest to your readers. Okay. And then I think that there's opportunity through like Double Dagger books and stuff, if that's a more formal pathway. But I'm sure we can figure something out. I hadn't really thought of it. That shows my lack of practice.
There you go.
And so I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, and then the book is obviously right now available through Indigo and through Amazon are the two outlets that it's available through now, and published by Double Dagger, which has been just great support through all of this. For
the families and friends who are going to have a loved one coming back from service, back home, the whole transition back to quote unquote normal everyday life, is there something that you can give to advice to family and friends who don't understand what it's like to come home so that we can be a better sense of home and freedom and safety to our loved ones as they return to us from service?
Yeah, so I'd be wary of giving advice because there are professionals that do that.
Yeah. Okay.
And I probably made every mistake that you could. But what I would say is that sometimes space is as helpful as connection, and so allow it to organically evolve, although it may be frustrating at times. And I'll give the example of the difference now than maybe in the past. So in the past, like let's say we're working in Korea, troops would come home on ships, so they would have 2 or 3 weeks at sea to kind of process and then come down. When you leave violent circumstances now, often it's a 48-hour turnaround, and you go from living in your Grey Hut in the center of Kandahar to all of a sudden being at home with your family and all the things that you're supposed to love and want to do, and all the challenges and great things that come with family, and you're just trying to put those two things together because you've been living a certain life for a long period of time, and it's quite intense. And then all of a sudden you're thrust back into family life, and it's such a welcome, but it's a whole bunch of emotion, a whole bunch of stimulus that is just new. And so I think just patience on both sides, and to deliberately take the opportunity to learn about what the best steps are to integrate. And I believe that there are classes that soldiers get as they're reintegrating. And one of my biggest mistakes was probably not paying attention to those, and then not understanding that also the families need to be involved. And there's stories about reintegration here where the soldier didn't go to any of the briefings, but the spouse did, and came back and said, "Hey, here's a situation that's going on, and you kind of probably need to do that together." Okay. If you're in that situation. So I think that, listen to the professionals, provide each other space and care, and remember that it's great to be home, and that it's that your time in that service is now past, and now your job is to be at home and be present
and create that safe place where there's no names and no pack drill, right?
That's right.
There you go. Yeah. So we did that. We brought it in at the end. I love it.
Yeah.
There you go. Now I know what a pack drill is. So now I'm super smart. So I can share that at my next event. I'll be like, "Hey, I learned something."
Are we still recording?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's if you're really interested, the visual of that is, to the point in the old days, it would be like a haversack full of rocks.
Wow.
And if you can imagine someone, so if let's say there's a beat like dance drill, military drill is like a dance beat, where it could be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. When they give this kind of drill, it's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and you've got to listen and then respond to the command with this heavy rucksack on. And so it really adds pressure to the soldier. And so it's not a pleasant punishment. And so that's where this that's why it came out that way.
It sounds like a football drill that's meant to get your attention, but also make you stronger in the same process.
That's right, because it hits two things. Yeah. It hits physical fatigue, and likely if a soldier has done something wrong, it's because they didn't listen to a command. Right. And in the old days, and even now, Like if you think about it, when you're under pressure, you've got to listen to the command but not anticipate it. And so it's a retraining. As most military punishments are geared around retraining, so they can re-enter into the military society. It's not about just pure punishment.
And you have to know how to react when no one else is around.
That's right.
And you're on your own.
Right.
You have to know how to process and respond. So that's smart.
That's right.
I love it. Steve, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for sharing so much with us. And to the men and women who are serving, to the families that are at home and their family members are serving, thank you for listening to the show. Make sure you buy a copy of Steve's book, No Names, No Pack Drill, and also donate it. Give it out to a veteran. Donate it to your local legions and wherever you can donate this book. Put it into the hands of the veterans in your life because I think they need to see this. Steve, thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun. Well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.